The words cut through the hangar like a blade through silk, sharp and final. "Fix this helicopter in 10 minutes, or you're fired." Victoria Sterling's voice echoed off the concrete walls, bouncing between million-dollar aircraft and the shocked faces of 20 engineers who had spent the last 4 hours failing to solve what should have been a simple problem. Her designer heels clicked against the oil-stained floor as she turned toward the man holding a mop in the corner. The man everyone had stopped seeing months ago. Marcus Chen had been invisible for so long that even the shadows seemed to forget he existed. But as those words hung in the air like a death sentence, something shifted behind his dark eyes. Something that made Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Aviation and heir to a $3 billion empire, take an unconscious step backward. Because, for just a moment, Marcus Chen stopped looking like a janitor and started looking like someone who understood exactly what was broken with her $15 million prototype. The Sikorsky S-97 Raider sat in the center of the hangar like a wounded predator, its sleek black body reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. Steam rose from its engine compartment, where cooling systems had overheated during the failed test flight 30 minutes earlier. The helicopter was supposed to demonstrate revolutionary stealth technology to military contractors from 5 different countries in exactly 3 hours. Contracts worth $800 million hung in the balance. Victoria had built Sterling Aviation from her father's legacy into the most innovative helicopter manufacturer in North America. At 34, she commanded boardrooms full of men twice her age, closed deals in 3 languages, and hadn't missed a deadline in 6 years. She wore power suits like armor, spoke in clipped sentences that left no room for negotiation, and had never met a problem that couldn't be solved with enough money, pressure, or both. But this problem was different. The Raider's advanced cooling system had a fatal flaw that her best engineers couldn't identify, let alone fix. The prototype's first test flight had lasted exactly 8 minutes before emergency systems forced an immediate landing. Now, it sat silent and broken, while the clock counted down to the most important demonstration of her career. She'd fired 3 consultants in the past month, brought in specialists from Boeing, Lockheed Martin, even Airbus. Nothing worked. The helicopter that was supposed to revolutionize military aviation couldn't stay in the air long enough to matter. And in 3 hours, she would have to stand in front of military procurement officers from the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Germany, and admit that Sterling Aviation had failed. The thought made her stomach clench with a familiar mixture of rage and panic. Failure wasn't in her vocabulary. It hadn't been since she was 12 years old, watching her father's company nearly collapse while he drank himself into oblivion after her mother's death. She'd sworn then that she would never let anything slip through her fingers the way he'd let everything slip through his. Marcus Chen understood failure intimately. He'd been living with it for 3 years, ever since the night his wife Lynn died in his arms while they waited for an ambulance that came too late. She'd been 8 months pregnant with their second child when the drunk driver ran the red light. Marcus had pulled her from the wreckage, held pressure on wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding, whispered promises about their future that would never come true. Their 4-year-old daughter Lily had been at his mother's house that night, safe and unaware that her world was about to shatter. Now 7 years old, she still asked sometimes when Mommy was coming home. Marcus had stopped trying to explain death to a child who built fairy houses in the garden and believed her father could fix anything. He'd been a senior helicopter mechanic for the Coast Guard before Lynn's death, responsible for keeping rescue aircraft operational in conditions that would ground civilian helicopters. He could rebuild a turbine engine in 40-foot seas, diagnose electrical failures by sound alone, and had once kept a damaged HH-65 Dolphin in the air long enough to save 6 people from a sinking fishing vessel. But after Lynn died, Marcus couldn't bear the thought of being responsible for anyone else's life. The idea that his hands, the same hands that had tried desperately to save his wife, might fail someone else's family, was unbearable. He'd resigned from the Coast Guard the day after the funeral and taken the first job he could find that didn't require him to think, to decide, to be responsible for anything more complicated than mopping floors. Sterling Aviation paid him $15 an hour to clean their facilities between midnight and 8 in the morning. It was perfect. Invisible work that let him disappear into routine while Lily slept safely at home. He could pick her up from school every afternoon, help with homework, make dinner, read bedtime stories, and pretend that their small, quiet life was enough. Most nights, he cleaned around the engineers without them noticing he existed. He'd learned to read the subtle signs of their frustration, the way they rubbed their temples when calculations didn't add up, the particular silence that fell when expensive experiments failed. He'd seen the Raiders' problem 3 weeks ago during his first cleaning shift after its arrival. The cooling system's intake manifold had been installed backward, creating a pressure differential that would cause catastrophic overheating under sustained load. It was the kind of mistake that happened when engineers who understood theory better than practice tried to install components designed for a different aircraft configuration. Marcus had recognized it because he'd seen the same error on a modified Coast Guard helicopter in Alaska. The fix would take 20 minutes if you knew what you were looking for. But he'd said nothing. Invisible men didn't offer advice to people who measured intelligence by degrees on walls and salaries in their bank accounts. He'd simply mopped around their meetings, emptied their coffee cups, and watched $800 million circle the drain. Because pride was more important than solutions. Now, Victoria Sterling stood before him with desperation, barely hidden behind designer makeup and perfectly styled hair. Her blue eyes, the same shade as the helicopter's navigation displays, blazed with the kind of intensity that had built empires and destroyed careers. She'd noticed him for the first time in 18 months of employment, and it wasn't because she'd suddenly developed respect for working-class people. She'd noticed him because her back was against the wall, and she was willing to humiliate anyone if it might save her company's reputation. The challenge she'd thrown at him wasn't an offer of redemption. It was a public execution designed to make her engineers look competent by comparison. After all, if even the janitor couldn't fix it, no one could blame them for failing. Well, Victoria's voice cut through his thoughts like a scalpel. Are you going to stand there all day? Or do you have something to say about my helicopter? Marcus looked at her for a long moment, seeing past the expensive clothes and calculated arrogance to the terror underneath. She was afraid, not just of losing money or contracts, but of being exposed as someone who'd inherited success rather than earned it. He recognized the fear, because he'd been running from his own version of it for 3 years. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The intake manifold is backward, Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the 20 pairs of eyes now focused on him. The cooling system can't maintain proper flow when the primary and secondary feeds are reversed. Under load, it'll overheat every time. The hangar fell silent except for the distant hum of ventilation fans and the occasional drip of hydraulic fluid from aircraft under maintenance. Victoria's carefully controlled expression flickered, revealing a moment of genuine surprise before the mask snapped back into place. Dr. James Morrison, Sterling Aviation's chief engineer and a man who'd designed helicopter systems for 30 years, stepped forward. He wore the kind of confidence that came from 3 engineering degrees and a salary that started with 6 figures. The manifold orientation was approved by computer modeling and verified by our installation team. It's positioned according to manufacturer specifications. Marcus nodded respectfully, but his dark eyes remained fixed on Victoria. Manufacturer. Specifications for the original Sikorsky design. But this isn't an original aircraft. You've modified the engine compartment to accommodate stealth plating, which changed the airflow dynamics. The manifold that worked in the prototype won't work in the production model. Dr. Morrison's face flushed red above his perfectly knotted tie. Are you suggesting that our entire engineering team missed something this fundamental? That 20 trained professionals with advanced degrees somehow made a mistake that He gestured dismissively at Marcus's janitor uniform. Maintenance worker? Could spot? The cruel emphasis on his job title hit exactly as intended. Designed to remind everyone present of the natural order of things. Engineers thought, janitors cleaned, and the universe maintained its proper hierarchy. Victoria watched the exchange with the detached interest of someone observing a laboratory experiment, waiting to see which variable would break first. Marcus felt the familiar weight of judgment settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. He'd grown accustomed to being invisible, to having his opinions dismissed before he could voice them. But something about Victoria's challenge, about the way she'd weaponized his desperation and made it entertainment for her staff, sparked anger he'd kept buried for 3 years. "No, sir," Marcus said, his voice carrying a new edge of authority that made several engineers exchange glances. "I'm suggesting that sometimes the people closest to a problem can't see the forest for the trees, and sometimes the person emptying your trash cans sees things differently because they're not invested in being right about theories that don't work in practice." He set down his mop and walked toward the raider, his movements suddenly purposeful in a way that made Victoria's chest tighten with something she couldn't name. He stopped beside the helicopter's engine compartment, pointing to a specific section of the cooling assembly. "This manifold," he continued, "is designed for horizontal airflow in the original Sikorsky configuration. But your stealth modifications created vertical air channels that reverse the pressure differential. The cooling system is fighting itself instead of working with engine dynamics. It's like trying to breathe underwater, technically possible for a short time, but not sustainable under stress." Dr. Morrison opened his mouth to argue, but Marcus wasn't finished. "The fix isn't complicated if you understand rotary wing engineering. Flip the manifold 180 degrees. Reroute the secondary cooling line through the starboard access panel instead of port, and adjust the flow sensors to match the new configuration. 20 minutes of work if you know what you're doing." The silence that followed was heavier than before, weighted with the possibility that the janitor might actually understand something the engineers had missed. Victoria found herself studying Marcus's face with the same intensity she usually reserved for financial reports and competitor analysis. There was something in his eyes, a depth of knowledge, that didn't match his job description. "You seem very confident about rotary wing engineering for someone who mops floors for a living," she said, her voice deceptively casual. "Should I assume you've worked on helicopters before?" Marcus hesitated, feeling the invisible chains that had kept him safe in anonymity beginning to crack. "I have some experience with aircraft maintenance," he admitted, the understatement feeling like a betrayal of everything he'd once been. "What kind of experience?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus thought about Lily, safe at school, unaware that her father was about to choose between the comfortable invisibility that protected them both and the dangerous visibility of being seen for who he really was. He thought about Lynn, who'd always said his gift for understanding complex systems was something the world needed, not something to hide. "United States Coast Guard," he said finally. "Helicopter rescue swimmer and senior maintenance specialist. 8 years. 2 tours in Alaska. 1 in the Gulf of Mexico. I've worked on every rotary wing aircraft in the Coast Guard fleet, including modified configurations for extreme weather operations. The revelation hit the hangar like a physical force. Dr. Morrison's confident expression crumbled into confusion. Several junior engineers pulled out phones, no doubt searching Marcus's background. Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her expensive heels, as every assumption she'd made about the man in front of her rearranged itself into something entirely different. Coast Guard rescue? Doctor. Morrison's voice had lost its dismissive edge. How many flight hours? 3,000 as crew. Another 1,000 as ground support for emergency operations. Marcus's voice carried the weight of experience earned in conditions most people couldn't imagine, including modified aircraft configurations that don't exist in any manual because they were field adaptations for rescue operations. Victoria's mouth went dry. She'd spent 18 months walking past a man who'd saved lives in conditions that would terrify her engineering team, treating him like furniture while he emptied trash cans and cleaned windows. The magnitude of her blindness was staggering, but more than that, it was dangerous. If Marcus was right about the helicopter, she'd been on the verge of demonstrating a fatally flawed aircraft to military contractors. "If you're so qualified," she said, fighting to maintain control of a situation that was slipping away from her, "why are you working as a janitor?" The question cut deeper than she'd intended, touching wounds that hadn't healed despite 3 years of careful avoidance. Marcus looked at her with something that might have been pity, and she realized that her power, her position, her entire carefully constructed authority meant nothing to someone who'd already lost everything that mattered. "Because some things matter more than career advancement," he said quietly. "And some prices are too high to pay for success." Before Victoria could process that statement fully, Marcus moved toward the helicopter with the kind of confidence that comes from muscle memory and hard-won expertise. He didn't ask permission. He didn't wait for approval. He simply began examining the cooling system with hands that knew exactly what they were looking for. Within 60 seconds, he'd identified the installation error Dr. Morrison's team had missed for 3 weeks. The manifold was indeed backward, creating exactly the pressure reversal Marcus had described. But more than that, the secondary cooling line had been routed through a pathway that created additional resistance, compounding the problem exponentially. "Jesus Christ, Doctor," Morrison whispered, his face pale as he realized the implications. "If we'd demonstrated this configuration to the military contractors, the aircraft would have experienced catastrophic overheating during the flight demonstration." Marcus finished. "Engine failure? Possible fire? Emergency landing? At best. At worst." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the hangar understood the stakes. Victoria felt something cold and sharp twist in her stomach. She'd been minutes away from the most important presentation of her career, completely unaware that her flagship product was a disaster waiting to happen. The janitor she'd mocked and dismissed had just saved her from professional suicide and possibly prevented a tragedy that could have destroyed lives. "How long to fix it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus checked his watch, calculating the work involved against the time remaining. 45 minutes if I work alone. 30 if Dr. Morrison's team assists and follows my instructions exactly. The challenge in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. He was offering to save her company, but only if she was willing to acknowledge that the man she'd treated as invisible possessed expertise her educated engineers lacked. It was a test of her character disguised as a practical necessity. Dr. Morrison looked like he'd swallowed something bitter, but nodded slowly. "What do you need?" "What?" Marcus's transformation from janitor to aircraft specialist was complete and undeniable. He moved through the hangar with the authority of someone who'd spent years making life-or-death decisions under pressure, directing engineers with decades more formal education as if they were apprentices learning their trade. Victoria watched from a distance, unable to reconcile the confident expert directing repairs with the invisible man who'd cleaned around her meetings for 18 months. She thought about all the times she'd walked past him without acknowledgement, all the opportunities to see the person behind the uniform she'd deliberately avoided. 28 minutes later, Marcus stepped back from the Raider's engine compartment, wiping his hands on a shop rag that had somehow appeared during the repair process. "Test the cooling system," he said to Dr. Morrison. "Full load simulation, 15-minute duration." The test ran flawlessly. Temperatures remained stable, pressure differentials stayed within normal parameters, and the cooling system performed exactly as designed. The Raider was ready for its demonstration flight, saved from disaster by a janitor who wasn't really a janitor at all. Victoria walked over to where Marcus stood, cleaning his hands, her heels echoing in the sudden quiet of the hangar. Up close, she could see the intelligence in his dark eyes, the confidence that came from genuine competence rather than inherited position. She felt smaller somehow, diminished by her own prejudices and assumptions. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling inadequate for what he'd done. "You saved my company's reputation, possibly saved lives. And she struggled to find language for the apology that was needed. "I treated you terribly. I made assumptions based on your job title that were completely wrong." Marcus nodded, accepting her gratitude without satisfaction or vindication. "Your helicopter will fly perfectly now. The demonstration will go well." "That's not what I meant." Victoria's voice carried an urgency that surprised them both. "I want to understand. How does someone with your qualifications end up?" She gestured helplessly, unable to finish the question. "Working as a janitor?" Marcus supplied, gently. "Because sometimes life breaks you in ways that can't be fixed with engineering degrees or Coast Guard training. Sometimes the only thing that matters is being there for the one person who still needs you." The pain in his voice was raw and immediate. Speaking to losses Victoria couldn't begin to imagine, she found herself wanting to know his story, to understand what had brought him to her hangar and kept him hidden in plain sight for so long. But before she could ask, the hangar doors opened, and military contractors began arriving for the demonstration flight. Marcus quickly retrieved his mop and cleaning cart, disappearing back into invisibility, as if the last hour had been a dream. Victoria watched him go, feeling as though something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of the world. The helicopter was fixed, the demonstration would succeed, and her company's future was secure. But the questions Marcus had raised about worth and value, about what truly mattered and what prices were too high to pay, followed her as she prepared to greet her most important clients. The Raider's engines started smoothly, its systems functioning flawlessly thanks to repairs performed by a man she'd never bothered to see clearly. As the helicopter lifted off for its demonstration flight, Victoria found herself looking for Marcus in the crowd of hangar personnel. He was there, barely visible, in the background, watching with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd done important work without need for recognition. And for the first time in her life, Victoria Sterling began to wonder if she'd been measuring success with the wrong equation entirely. The demonstration flight was flawless. For 47 minutes, the Sikorsky S-97 Raider performed aerial maneuvers that would have been impossible just hours earlier, its stealth capabilities and cooling systems working in perfect harmony. Military contractors from 5 nations watched in amazement as the helicopter executed precision formations, high-speed reconnaissance patterns, and emergency landing scenarios without a single system failure. Victoria Sterling stood in the observation tower, watching $800 million in contracts materialize before her eyes, she should have felt triumphant. Instead, she found herself scanning the hangar floor below for a man in a janitor's uniform who had saved her from disaster, and then disappeared back into the shadows, as if heroism was just another item on his cleaning checklist. General Patricia Rodriguez from the Pentagon approached with the kind of smile that meant serious money was about to change hands. "Miss Sterling, that aircraft exceeds every specification we discussed. When can Sterling Aviation deliver the first production units?" 18 months for the initial order, Victoria replied automatically, her attention still divided between the conversation that would secure her company's future and the absence of a man she'd never truly seen before today. Full fleet deployment within 36 months. As contracts were signed and hands were shaken, Victoria felt a strange disconnect from the celebration happening around her. Her greatest professional triumph was tainted by the knowledge that she'd nearly destroyed everything through willful blindness and casual cruelty toward someone whose expertise surpassed her entire engineering team. 3 hours later, after the last contractor had left, and the hangar had returned to its usual after-hours quiet, Victoria found herself walking through the facility with no particular destination in mind. She told herself she was conducting a routine inspection. But her steps led inevitably toward the custodial office, where Marcus would be beginning his regular shift. She found him in the equipment room, methodically organizing cleaning supplies with the same attention to detail he'd shown while repairing her helicopter. He looked up when she entered, his expression neutral, but not unwelcoming. "Congratulations on your demonstration," he said quietly. "The flight went well?" "800 million in contracts," Victoria replied, then immediately felt shallow for reducing the day's events to numbers. "The helicopter performed perfectly. Because of you." Marcus nodded and returned to arranging bottles of industrial cleaner in precise rows. "I'm glad it worked out." The casual, op-style, absolute place endures dismissal of his contribution irritated Victoria in ways she couldn't fully understand. "You saved my company from humiliation and possible lawsuits, and I'm glad it worked out. Is all you have to say?" "What would you like me to say?" Marcus asked, meeting her eyes directly. "That I'm proud to have helped? That this changes anything about my life or yours? We both know it doesn't." The matter-of-fact acceptance of his continued invisibility stung more than anger would have. Victoria found herself stepping closer, invading the carefully maintained distance that had defined their relationship for 18 months. "It changes everything," she said. "I know who you are now. What you're capable of, I can't pretend I don't know." "Knowing and caring are different things," Marcus replied gently. "Tomorrow you'll go back to your office and your meetings, and I'll go back to mopping floors. The world will return to its natural order." "What if I don't want it to?" The question surprised them both. Victoria hadn't planned to say it, hadn't even known she was thinking it until the words escaped. But standing in that small room surrounded by cleaning supplies and industrial equipment, she realized that the comfortable boundaries of her carefully ordered world no longer felt comfortable at all. Marcus studied her face with the same intensity he'd shown while diagnosing the helicopter's problems. "Why? Why? Why?" he asked finally. "Because you feel guilty about how you treated me? Because you think you owe me something? Guilt isn't a good foundation for anything meaningful." "Not guilt," Victoria said, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was feeling. "Curiosity. You said some prices are too high to pay for success. What did you mean?" For a long moment, Marcus didn't respond. He turned back to his work, arranging supplies with mechanical precision, while Victoria waited for an answer she wasn't sure she deserved. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of carefully guarded pain. He said without looking at her, "Lynn, She was a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital, the kind of person who remembered every patient's name and stayed late to comfort scared parents. We met when I was stationed at Coast Guard Base, Seattle. She thought what I did was romantic, saving people from disasters. Victoria remained silent, sensing that interruption would shatter whatever fragile trust was allowing him to share this story. We bought a house in Tacoma with a garden where she grew vegetables and flowers. She wanted to teach our children about growing things, about nurturing life, instead of just preserving it. When she got pregnant with our second child, she started planning a bigger garden, talking about family traditions we'd passed down. His hands stilled on the cleaning supplies, and Victoria could see the careful control he was exercising to keep his voice steady. December 15th, 3 years ago, she was driving home from a prenatal appointment when a drunk driver ran a red light. By the time I got to the hospital, they told me she'd been gone for 20 minutes. Her and the baby both. The doctors said she probably didn't suffer, but I'll never know for sure. The raw pain in his voice made Victoria's chest tighten. With sympathy she'd rarely felt for anyone, she wanted to say something comforting. But every phrase that occurred to her seemed inadequate against the magnitude of his loss. Lily was 4 then, Marcus continued. How Lily was time. How Lily was 4 then STEM. Too young to understand why Mommy wasn't coming home, old enough to know something terrible had happened. I took leave from the Coast Guard to take care of her, thinking it would be temporary, that I'd go back once she adjusted. But you never went back, Victoria said softly. I couldn't. Marcus finally turned to face her, and she saw in his eyes the same depth of pain she'd been carrying in her own carefully guarded heart. Every time I thought about getting back in a helicopter, about being responsible for someone else's emergency, I remembered holding Lynn while she died. I remembered promising her everything would be okay when I knew it wouldn't be. He moved to the small window that looked out over the hangar floor, where the Raider sat like a sleeping giant under the security lights. The Coast Guard offered me a desk job, administrative work, that would keep me close to home. But I couldn't bear the thought of watching other people do the work I used to love while I processed paperwork and pretended I was still useful. So, I resigned and became a janitor, Victoria said, beginning to understand the depth of his transformation. I became invisible, Marcus corrected. It was safer that way. No one expected anything from the janitor except clean floors and empty trash cans. I could take care of Lily. Keep us both safe from a world that takes away everything that matters without warning. Victoria felt something crack inside her chest, a wall she'd built around her own carefully protected vulnerabilities. How old is Lily now? 7. She starts 2nd grade next month. Marcus's voice warmed slightly at the mention of his daughter. She wants to be a veterinarian or an astronaut, depending on which day you ask her. She builds elaborate fairy houses in our backyard and insists that if you believe hard enough, magic is real. Does she know what you used to do? She knows Daddy used to help people who were in trouble. She doesn't need to know more than that. Marcus turned back to Victoria. She's the only thing that matters now. Keeping her safe, keeping her happy, being there for every scraped knee and bedtime story and parent-teacher conference. That's worth more than any career. Victoria found herself thinking about her own childhood, about a father who'd chosen work over presents and a mother who'd died when Victoria was too young to say goodbye properly. The parallels between her story and Marcus's were uncomfortable but undeniable. Is that why you took this job specifically? She asked. The schedule? Night shift means I'm home when she gets up, home when she gets back from school. I can help with homework, make dinner, read to her before bed. During the day, while she's at school, I sleep or take care of errands. It's not glamorous, but it works. Victoria nodded slowly, beginning to understand the careful architecture of the life Marcus had built around his daughter's needs. She must be proud of what you did today. She doesn't know about today, Marcus said firmly. And she won't. I don't want her to think there's anything wrong with the life we have now, anything missing that needs to be fixed. The protective edge in his voice told Victoria that this was a boundary she shouldn't cross, but it also revealed something else. Marcus was afraid, not of failure or judgment, but of hope. He'd built a small, safe world for himself and his daughter, and anything that threatened that safety, even success, was dangerous. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. What if? Victoria said carefully. There was a way to honor what you used to be without sacrificing what you are now. What if you didn't have to choose between being a father and being an engineer? There isn't, Marcus replied immediately. I learned that lesson 3 years ago. You can't serve two masters and do justice to either one. Victoria thought about her own life, about the sacrifices she'd made for success, the relationships she'd never allowed herself to build, because they might interfere with her ambitions. What if the problem isn't serving two masters? What if it's choosing the wrong master in the first place? Marcus studied her with the same analytical intensity he'd shown while examining the helicopter. What are you really asking, Miss Sterling? The formal address stung, reminding Victoria that despite the intimacy of their conversation, they remained separated by the vast gulf between her corner office and his cleaning cart. But something in his eyes suggested that the distance might not be as insurmountable as it appeared. I'm asking if you'd consider consulting for Sterling Aviation, she said, the words coming out in a rush before her practical mind could stop them. Not full-time employment? Not anything that would interfere with your schedule with Lily. Just occasional technical consultation when we encounter problems that require your expertise. You have Dr. Morrison and his team for technical consultation. Dr. Morrison's team spent 3 weeks failing to identify a problem you diagnosed in 60 seconds, Victoria pointed out. There's a difference between theoretical knowledge and practical experience. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria could see him weighing the offer against carefully maintained protective instincts. What would that look like practically? I don't know, Victoria admitted. We'd figure it out together. Maybe a few hours a month, reviewing designs or troubleshooting problems. You'd keep your current job and schedule. Think of it as insurance against future disasters. And if Lily needed me during one of these consultations, then you'd leave, Victoria said without hesitation. She comes first, always. That's non-negotiable. Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a slight relaxation of the defensive posture he'd maintained throughout their conversation. Why is this important to you? Victoria considered lying, offering some corporate explanation about utilizing available talent or maximizing efficiency. But standing in that small room with a man who'd just shared his deepest pain, dishonesty felt impossible. Because I've spent my entire life believing that success meant being better than other people, smarter than other people, more important than other people, she said slowly. Today I discovered that one of the most capable people I've ever met has been emptying my trash for 18 months while I walked past him like he was invisible. She paused, gathering courage for the admission that felt more dangerous than any business negotiation she'd ever conducted. Because I'm starting to think that maybe the way I've been measuring success is completely wrong. Maybe the person who gave up everything to take care of his daughter is more successful than the person who built a company but can't maintain a meaningful relationship with another human being. The honesty in her voice surprised them both. Victoria had never spoken so openly about her own vulnerabilities, had never acknowledged the emptiness that success had failed to fill. But something about Marcus's presence, about the quiet dignity with which he'd rebuilt his life after devastating loss, made pretense feel unnecessary. "I'm not looking for charity," Marcus said gently, "or for someone to fix my life." "I'm not offering charity," Victoria replied. "I'm offering partnership. You have knowledge my company needs, and maybe I have resources that could make your life a little easier, without changing what matters most." Marcus looked out the window again, watching security guards make their rounds through the hangar. When he spoke, his voice carried a hint of something that might have been curiosity. "What kind of resources?" Victoria felt a spark of hope, but kept her voice carefully neutral. "Better health insurance for you and Lily. Educational fund contributions for her future. Flexible consulting fees that might make it possible to work fewer hours for the same income. And, in return, your expertise when we need it. Your perspective on problems my educated engineers miss because they've never worked in conditions where failure means people die." The reference to his Coast Guard experience was deliberate, acknowledging the value of knowledge gained through real-world consequences rather than academic theory. Marcus recognized the distinction and seemed to appreciate it. "I'd need to think about it," he said finally. "Discuss it with Lily in terms she can understand." "Of course." Victoria reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, then hesitated. "Actually, let me give you my personal number. This isn't a business conversation anymore." She wrote her cell phone number on the back of the card and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Victoria felt an unexpected jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with professional relationships or consulting contracts. "Take your time," she said. "Whatever you decide, it won't change what you did today. You saved my company, possibly saved lives, and you did it without expecting anything in return. That kind of integrity is rare." Marcus pocketed the card without looking at it. "Integrity doesn't pay the rent." "Maybe not," Victoria agreed, "but it builds the kind of character that makes a 7-year-old girl believe magic is real because her father can fix anything." Something like a smile flickered across Marcus's face, the first genuinely warm expression Victoria had seen from him all day. "You don't know Lily." "I'd like to," Victoria said, then immediately wondered where that impulse had come from. "I mean, if you decide to work with us in any capacity, she's obviously an important part of your life. I should understand what matters to you." "She matters," Marcus said simply. "Everything else is negotiable." Victoria nodded, understanding that she'd been given a glimpse into the hierarchy of values that governed Marcus's life. Unlike her own world, where everything was negotiable if the price was right, his had clear, immovable priorities. "I should let you get back to work," she said, suddenly aware that they'd been talking for over an hour and his shift had barely begun. "Thank you for explaining about Lynn, about why you left the Coast Guard. I know that wasn't easy to share." "She was worth sharing," Marcus replied. She'd have liked knowing her story helped someone understand something important. As Victoria walked back through the hangar toward her car, she found herself seeing the facility differently. The clean floors and organized workspaces weren't just the result of hired maintenance services, they were the product of careful attention paid by someone who understood that details mattered. That taking pride in work, any work, was a choice that reflected character. Her Tesla sat alone in the executive parking area, isolated from the employee lot by more than just distance. For the first time, the separation felt less like privilege and more like loneliness. As she drove home to her empty penthouse apartment, Victoria thought about Marcus returning to a house where a 7-year-old girl waited to hear about his day. She wondered what it would be like to have someone waiting, someone for whom your safe return mattered more than your professional achievements. The thought stayed with her as she ate a solitary dinner and worked late into the night, reviewing contracts that should have felt like victories, but instead felt like symbols of a life built around the wrong priorities. 2 days later, Victoria's assistant buzzed her office with an unusual request. "Miss Sterling? There's a Marcus Chen here to see you. He says, you'll know what it's about." Victoria's heart rate quickened unexpectedly. "Send him up." Marcus appeared in her office doorway, wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt instead of his usual janitor uniform. The transformation was subtle but significant, suggesting that he'd made some decision about how he wanted to present himself for this conversation. "I talked to Lily," he said without preamble, accepting Victoria's gesture to sit in one of the chairs facing her desk. "I told her that the company where I work wanted me to help them with some special projects, and that it might mean a little more money and better opportunities for her." "What did she say?" "She asked if it meant I wouldn't be able to pick her up from school anymore." Marcus smiled slightly. "When I assured her that wouldn't change, she said I should definitely do it because maybe then we could afford to go to Disney World." Victoria laughed, a genuine sound that felt rusty from lack of use. "Smart girl." "She has some conditions," Marcus continued, his tone becoming more serious. "She wants to meet you before I agree to anything. She's very protective of our routines." The idea of being interviewed by a 7-year-old was both terrifying and oddly appealing to Victoria. "When?" Saturday afternoon, if you're available. We usually go to the park near our house. Nothing formal, just a chance for her to see that you're a real person, and not some corporate entity trying to steal her father away." Victoria found herself nodding. Before she'd fully processed the implications of spending her weekend in a public park, probably getting grass stains on designer clothes while trying to convince a child that her intentions were honorable. She said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "What should I know about her? She's brilliant, curious, and has excellent instincts about people," Marcus replied. "She'll ask you questions you don't expect, and make judgments based on how you answer. Don't try to impress her. She values authenticity above everything else." "Like her father," Victoria said quietly. Marcus met her eyes directly. "If this is going to work, Miss Sterling, we need to establish some ground rules. I'm not looking for charity or pity. I'm not a project for you to fix or a way to ease corporate guilt. I'm offering expertise in exchange for fair compensation and mutual respect." The formal tone was back, but Victoria sensed it was protective rather than dismissive. Understood. And it's Victoria. If we're going to be partners, we should probably use first names. "Partners," Marcus repeated, testing the word. "That implies equality." "It does," Victoria agreed. "Your knowledge and experience are worth more than my MBA and corner office combined. Today proved that." Marcus nodded slowly, but Victoria could see he was still processing the concept of being treated as an equal rather than a subordinate. 3 years of invisibility would take time to overcome. "There's something else," Marcus said. "If we do this, if I start consulting for Sterling Aviation, I need you to understand that I'm not the man I used to be. The person who could work 18-hour days and thrive under pressure, who lived for the next rescue mission or the next technical challenge that person died with Lynn." Victoria felt the pain in his voice like a physical blow. "What kind of person are you now?" Marcus considered the question carefully. Careful. Deliberate. Someone who measures every decision against its impact on the most important person in my life. Someone who's learned that being necessary to one person is more valuable than being impressive to 100 people. "That sounds like someone I could learn from," Victoria said softly. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. A recognition that Victoria's interest might extend beyond his technical expertise to the fundamental questions about what made life meaningful. It was dangerous territory for both of them, but neither seemed inclined to retreat to safer ground. "Saturday at 2 o'clock, Marcus said, standing to leave. "Volunteer Park, near the playground. Lily will be the one building elaborate structures in the sandbox and explaining to anyone who'll listen why her design is structurally superior to everyone else's." Victoria smiled. "I look forward to meeting her." As Marcus left, Victoria found herself staring out her office window at the city below, thinking about a little girl who believed magic was real, and a father who'd given up everything to preserve that belief. For the first time in years, Saturday couldn't come soon enough. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Seattle feel like a postcard. Victoria Sterling sat in her Tesla outside Volunteer Park for 10 minutes, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror and wondering when meeting a 7-year-old had become more intimidating than facing Pentagon procurement officers. She'd changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on dark jeans, a soft cashmere sweater, and sneakers that had never touched actual pavement. The outfit felt like a costume, but it was the closest thing to normal she could manage from a wardrobe designed for boardrooms and galas. Through the car window, she could see Marcus pushing a small girl on a swing set, both of them laughing at something she'd said. Even from a distance, Victoria could see the resemblance between father and daughter in their serious dark eyes and the way they moved with careful, deliberate grace. Taking a breath that felt more like preparation for combat than a casual meeting, Victoria got out of her car and walked toward the playground. As she approached, the little girl spotted her immediately and whispered something to Marcus that made him smile. "You must be Victoria," the child said with startling directness as Victoria reached the swing set. "I'm Lily Chen, and I have some questions for you." Victoria found herself at eye level with a tiny person who radiated the kind of confidence usually reserved for much older individuals. Lily had long black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and was wearing overalls covered in what appeared to be authentic playground dirt. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," Victoria replied, settling onto the swing next to Lily's. "Your father tells me you're very protective of your routines." "Daddy's routines are my routines," Lily said seriously. "If you mess up his schedule, you mess up mine, and that would make me very unhappy." Marcus stepped back slightly, letting the conversation proceed while staying close enough to intervene if necessary. Victoria could see him trying not to smile at his daughter's frank assessment of the situation. "What's your most important routine?" "Number 2, Victoria asked. "Every day after school, Daddy picks me up, and we go to the coffee shop on Pine Street. I get hot chocolate with marshmallows, and he gets coffee that smells terrible but makes him happy. We talk about my day and his day, and he helps me with homework if I need it." Lily swung gently as she spoke, her feet not quite reaching the ground. "Then we go home and make dinner together. Daddy lets me choose what we eat on Tuesdays and Fridays, but the other days he chooses because he's better at making sure we eat vegetables." The casual intimacy of their shared life made Victoria's chest tighten with something that might have been envy. "That sounds perfect." "It is perfect," Lily agreed, "which is why I need to make sure you're not going to ruin it." Victoria glanced at Marcus, who was now openly smiling at his daughter's negotiation tactics. "What would convince you that I won't?" "Tell me why you want Daddy to work for you," Lily said, fixing Victoria with a stare that was remarkably similar to Marcus's analytical intensity. "And don't lie to me. I can always tell when adults are lying." The directness of the question caught Victoria off guard. She'd prepared for typical child conversations about favorite colors and animals, not existential inquiries about her motivations. Because your father is the smartest person I've ever met when it comes to understanding how things work, Victoria said honestly. My company builds helicopters, and sometimes we have problems we can't figure out. Your father can see solutions that no one else can see. Those are different things. Felt as though she were being cross-examined by the world's smallest prosecutor. You're right. They are different. She paused, considering how to explain complex emotions to a child. I think working with your father might teach me things about what's important that I never learned before. Lily studied her with the kind of attention usually reserved for fascinating insects. What kind of things? Like how to care about people instead of just caring about winning. How to be proud of work because it helps people instead of just because it makes money. How to. Victoria stopped, realizing she was about to admit vulnerabilities to a 7-year-old that she'd never acknowledged to adults. How to what? Lily prompted gently. How to be a better person. Victoria finished quietly. The honesty in her voice seemed to register with Lily, who nodded thoughtfully. Daddy's really good at helping people be better. He helped Mrs. 42. Martinez next door fix her car when she couldn't afford a mechanic, and he taught Tommy from my class how to build a birdhouse for his mom's birthday. He sounds like a good teacher. He's the best teacher, Lily said with absolute certainty. But he gets sad sometimes when he thinks, I'm not looking. I think it's because he misses Mommy. The casual reference to her mother's absence hit Victoria like a physical blow. She looked at Marcus, whose expression had become carefully neutral in the way she recognized as protective armor. Do you miss her too? Victoria asked gently. Every day, Lily said matter-of-factly. But Daddy says missing someone means you love them, and that's a good thing to feel. He says Mommy would want us to be happy and take care of each other. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes at the matter-of-fact wisdom in the child's voice. Your daddy's right about that. I know, Lily said with the confidence of a child who'd never doubted her father's judgment. He's right about most things. That's why I need to make sure you're not going to make him sad. How would I make him sad? Lily swung thoughtfully for a moment before answering. If you made him feel bad about cleaning floors, if you treated him like he wasn't important, if you made promises you couldn't keep. Each item in Lily's list felt like an arrow aimed directly at Victoria's conscience. Without realizing it, she'd already committed the first 2 offenses simply by ignoring Marcus for 18 months. Those would be terrible things to do, Victoria agreed. What if I promised never to do any of them? Promises are just words, Lily said with startling sophistication. You have to show people you mean them. Before Victoria could ask how she might demonstrate her sincerity, Lily hopped off the swing and ran toward an elaborate sandcastle under construction in the nearby sandbox. Come look at this, she called back to Victoria. I'm building the International Space Station, but the proportions are really difficult. Victoria followed, finding herself kneeling in expensive jeans beside a sandbox where Lily was indeed constructing something that bore a remarkable resemblance to the space station's modular design. See? This part is the Unity node, Lily explained, pointing to a carefully sculpted sand structure. And these are the solar arrays, but I can't figure out how to make them stable enough to support their own weight. Victoria stared at the construction in amazement. How do you know about the Unity node? I read about it online. I want to be an astronaut when I grow up, so I need to understand how spacecraft are built. Lily frowned at her sand solar arrays. The real ones are supported by a truss system, but sand doesn't have the same tensile strength as aluminum. Marcus appeared beside them, carrying 3 cups of coffee shop hot chocolate. Lily's been working on this project for 2 weeks, he explained, sitting cross-legged in the sand, without regard for his clean jeans. She's trying to solve a legitimate engineering problem using inappropriate materials. What if we added support structures underneath? Victoria suggested, studying the problem with the same seriousness she'd applied to a helicopter design challenge. Internal buttressing that wouldn't be visible from the top? Lily's face lit up with excitement. Like flying buttresses in Gothic cathedrals. The support comes from underneath and behind, instead of from within the structure itself. Victoria blinked in surprise. You know about Gothic architecture? I know about lots of things, Lily said matter-of-factly, already beginning to modify her sand construction based on Victoria's suggestion. Daddy says learning is the most important thing anyone can do, so I try to learn something new every day. As they worked together on the space station, Victoria found herself genuinely engaged in problem-solving with a 7-year-old whose enthusiasm for engineering challenges was infectious. When Lily's modified design successfully supported the sand solar arrays, the child's delighted laugh made Victoria feel prouder than any business achievement in recent memory. You're good at building things, Lily observed, studying Victoria with fresh interest. Maybe you could help Daddy with his projects too. What kind of projects does your daddy work on? Secret ones, Lily said with theatrical whisper. He goes to the garage after I go to bed and builds things. He won't tell me what they are, but I heard him on the phone ordering special parts. Victoria glanced at Marcus, who looked slightly embarrassed at having his evening activities exposed by his observant daughter. They're not secret, he protested mildly. They're just personal projects. What kind of personal projects? Victoria asked, her curiosity genuine. Marcus hesitated, clearly debating whether to share something he'd kept private. I've been working on modifications to Coast Guard rescue equipment, improvements to helicopter winch systems that might save time during water rescues. The casual revelation hit Victoria like lightning. You're still designing rescue equipment? It's just theoretical, Marcus said quickly. Ideas I send to former colleagues who might be able to implement them. Nothing official. Daddy's really good at making things better, Lily added proudly. He fixed the heater in Mrs. Martinez's car and rebuilt the motor on Tommy's mom's wheelchair, so it's much quieter now. Victoria felt pieces of Marcus's character clicking into place like components in a complex machine. Even in his self-imposed exile from professional engineering, he couldn't stop using his skills to help people. The man who'd claimed he'd given up being useful was quietly improving lives throughout his neighborhood. Would you show me? Victoria asked impulsively. The rescue equipment designs, I mean. Marcus looked uncertain. They're not polished presentations, just rough sketches and calculations. I'd like to see how you think about problems when you're not constrained by corporate priorities or budget limitations. Before Marcus could answer, Lily's attention was caught by something behind Victoria. Daddy! Why is that man taking pictures of us? Victoria turned to see a figure with a telephoto lens camera positioned near the park's entrance, clearly focused on their small group. Cold recognition washed over her as she realized the implications. We need to leave, Victoria said urgently, standing and brushing sand from her jeans. Now. Marcus immediately picked up on the tension in her voice and began gathering their things, while Lily looked between the adults with growing confusion. What's wrong? Lily asked as Marcus lifted her from the sandbox. Nothing's wrong, sweetheart, Marcus said calmly, but Victoria could see the protective alertness in his posture. We're just going to head home a little early. As they walked quickly toward the parking area, Victoria's phone began buzzing with text messages. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. What is it? Marcus asked quietly. Paparazzi? Victoria said grimly. Someone leaked that I was spending my Saturday in a park with my company's janitor. The business press loves stories about executive eccentricity. They reached their cars, and Victoria could see more photographers arriving at the park entrance. The peaceful afternoon had transformed into exactly the kind of circus she'd spent her entire career avoiding. "I'm sorry," Victoria said to Marcus. "I should have realized this might happen. My personal life isn't really personal when you're in the public eye." Lily tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, is Victoria in trouble? Because she was playing with us?" The innocent question cut straight to the heart of Victoria's dilemma. Her professional reputation was built on careful image management and strategic distance from anything that might be perceived as weakness or irregularity. Being photographed, building sand, castles with her janitor's daughter was exactly the kind of human moment that corporate boards interpreted as lack of serious focus. "It's complicated, Lily," Marcus said gently. "Sometimes adults have silly rules about who they're supposed to spend time with." "That's stupid," Lily declared, with the absolute moral clarity of childhood. "If people are nice, you should be able to spend time with them." Victoria's phone rang, displaying her assistant's number. She answered reluctantly. "Victoria? Thank God." Sarah's voice was tight with stress. "I've had 17 calls from reporters in the last 20 minutes. Someone sent them photos of you at a park with a Sterling Aviation employee and his daughter. The board is requesting an immediate explanation." Victoria watched Marcus buckle Lily into her car seat, his movements careful and protective. The contrast between his quiet devotion to his daughter and the corporate hysteria exploding through her phone felt like a revelation about competing value systems. "Tell the board I'll address their concerns on Monday," Victoria said finally. "Victoria, they're saying this looks unprofessional, that you're fraternizing inappropriately with subordinates. Harold Morrison is calling for an emergency meeting to discuss your judgment." Victoria felt anger build in her chest, hot and clean. Harold Morrison couldn't diagnose a helicopter problem if his life depended on it. "Tell him I'll be happy to discuss professional judgment with anyone who can explain why our chief engineer missed a critical flaw that could have killed people." "Victoria, Monday." Sarah, "Set up the meeting for Monday morning." Victoria ended the call and turned to find Marcus watching her with concern and something that might have been admiration. "You don't have to defend us," he said quietly. "I understand if associating with me publicly creates problems for you. The only problem I have," Victoria said fiercely, "is with people who think a person's worth is determined by their job title instead of their character." Lily's voice piped up from the car seat. "Are you going to get in trouble for being our friend?" Victoria looked into the child's serious dark eyes and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. For 34 years, she'd measured every decision against its impact on her professional advancement. Standing in that parking lot with photographers lurking nearby, she realized that some things were more important than corporate politics. "I hope not," Victoria told Lily honestly. "But if I do, it won't be because I regret meeting you." Monday morning arrived like a storm front, bringing with it a boardroom full of stern faces and hostile questions. Victoria sat at the head of the polished conference table, looking at men who'd worked with her for years, as if they'd never seen her before. Harold Morrison, Sterling Aviation's chief financial officer and the closest thing Victoria had to a corporate rival, led the attack, with barely concealed satisfaction. "Victoria, these photographs suggest a concerning lack of professional boundaries," he said, sliding printed copies of the park images across the table. "Our stockholders expect leadership that maintains appropriate distance from subordinate employees." Studying the image of herself kneeling in sand next to Lily's space station construction. In the picture, she was smiling with genuine happiness, looking more relaxed than she had in any corporate photo shoot. "What exactly concerns you about these images, Harold?" "You're fraternizing with custodial staff," Morrison said, as if the words themselves were distasteful. It creates the appearance of favoritism, poor judgment, inappropriate relationships. Inappropriate relationships, Victoria repeated slowly. Because I spent Saturday afternoon with a 7-year-old girl and her father? Because you spent Saturday afternoon with an employee whose background you clearly haven't properly investigated, Morrison shot back. Did you know your janitor friend has a history of mental health issues? That he abandoned his military career after some kind of breakdown? Victoria felt ice form in her veins. How do you know about Marcus's background? I had our security firm run a standard background check after the helicopter incident last week. He left the Coast Guard under questionable circumstances, has no stable employment history since then, and is clearly using his position here to manipulate his way into your personal life. The casual cruelty of Morrison's assessment made Victoria's hands clench into fists under the table. Marcus saved this company from demonstrating a fatally flawed aircraft to military contractors. His expertise prevented what could have been a catastrophic failure. A failure that occurred because our engineering team was distracted by inappropriate pressure to rush timelines, Morrison countered smoothly. The fact that this maintenance worker happened to identify the problem doesn't make him qualified for the kind of consulting position I understand you're considering offering him. Victoria realized with cold clarity that Morrison had been building a case against both Marcus and her judgment for days, probably hoping to use the situation to undermine her authority with the board. Members of the board, Morrison continued, I submit that Miss Sterling's personal involvement with this employee represents a serious lapse in professional judgment that calls into question her fitness for leadership. The words hung in the conference room, air like poison gas. Victoria looked around the table at faces she'd known for years, searching for allies and finding mostly uncomfortable neutrality. The board that had celebrated her success was now questioning her competence because she'd been photographed, treating a working-class father and his daughter with basic human dignity. Harold, Victoria said quietly, are you suggesting I should be removed from leadership because I discovered that one of our most valuable employees was being wasted in a custodial position? I'm suggesting that your emotional involvement with this employee has compromised your ability to make rational business decisions. Victoria stood slowly, feeling a strange calm descend over her. For 3 days, she'd been dreading this confrontation, worried about defending decisions she wasn't sure she could explain rationally. But sitting in that boardroom, listening to Marcus being described as manipulative and unstable, she realized her priorities had become crystal clear. You want to discuss rational business decisions? Victoria asked, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. Let's discuss the rational business decision to ignore expertise because it comes from someone who empties trash cans instead of someone with an Ivy League diploma. She walked to the conference room's presentation screen and pulled up the engineering reports from the previous week. Marcus Chen identified a critical system failure that 27 trained engineers missed for 3 weeks, a failure that would have caused engine overheating, possible fire, and emergency landing during our military demonstration. If that helicopter had crashed with procurement officers on board, Sterling Aviation would be facing lawsuits, criminal investigations, and the complete destruction of our military contracts. Morrison tried to interrupt, but Victoria continued relentlessly. Marcus didn't just identify the problem. He fixed it in 28 minutes, using modifications that our engineering team said were impossible. The aircraft performed flawlessly during demonstration, leading to $800 million in confirmed contracts. She turned to face the board directly. So, yes, Harold, I'm emotionally involved with the employee who saved this company. I'm emotionally involved with his 7-year-old daughter, who builds space stations in sandboxes and asks penetrating questions about engineering challenges. I'm emotionally involved with the idea that maybe, just maybe, a person's value isn't determined by their salary or their job title. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of helicopters being tested on the facility tarmac. Marcus Chen is a former Coast Guard warrant officer who spent 8 years maintaining rescue aircraft under conditions that would terrify our testing protocols. Victoria continued. He has 3,000 flight hours, multiple commendations for technical innovation, and expertise in aircraft modification that exceeds anyone on our current staff. She paused, letting that information sink in before delivering the final piece of information that would either end her career or revolutionize it. He's also been working on improvements to Coast Guard rescue equipment in his spare time. Modifications that could save minutes during water rescues, which means saving lives. I've offered him a consulting position that would give Sterling Aviation access to practical experience our competitors can't match. Morrison's face had gone pale. You can't be serious about hiring him for an executive position based on personal feelings. I'm serious about hiring him because he's the most qualified helicopter specialist I've ever encountered, Victoria replied. Personal feelings don't factor into that assessment. That wasn't entirely true, but Victoria realized she no longer cared about the distinction. Her feelings for Marcus and Lily had opened her eyes to value systems she'd never considered. But the professional benefits of working with him were undeniable. Board member Patricia Williams, a woman who'd mentored Victoria through her early career, spoke for the first time during the meeting. Victoria, you've built this company into an industry leader through sound judgment and strategic thinking. If you believe this man's expertise justifies the unusual circumstances, then I'm inclined to trust your assessment. Morrison looked stricken. Patricia, you can't be serious. The optics alone. The optics of what? Patricia cut him off sharply. Of recognizing talent regardless of current job title? Of treating employees as human beings instead of corporate resources? Harold, your concerns sound less like business strategy and more like social prejudice. Victoria felt a surge of gratitude toward Patricia, but knew the real test was yet to come. I'm proposing that we offer Marcus Chen a consulting contract with Sterling Aviation. Part-time, flexible schedule, focused on technical innovation and problem-solving. His expertise could give us competitive advantages worth millions in future contracts. And, if the media attention continues, Morrison pressed, if stockholders question your judgment? Victoria thought about Lily's absolute certainty that nice people should be able to spend time together regardless of adult rules. She thought about Marcus's quiet dignity in the face of condescension, his willingness to save her company without expecting recognition or reward. Then I'll explain that Sterling Aviation values competence over credentials, innovation over appearances, and treating people with dignity regardless of their position in the corporate hierarchy, Victoria said firmly. If that costs us stockholders who prioritize prejudice over profit, I'm comfortable with that trade. The vote was closer than Victoria had expected, but the board approved Marcus's consulting contract by a narrow margin. Morrison's face was stone as the meeting adjourned, but Patricia squeezed Victoria's shoulder as they left the conference room. That was either very brave or very foolish, Patricia murmured. I hope for your sake it was brave. Victoria hoped so too. But as she returned to her office, she realized that for the first time in her adult life, she'd made a major decision based on what felt right rather than what felt safe. The sensation was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. That evening, Victoria drove to Marcus's neighborhood, a modest area of older houses where working families raised children and neighbors knew each other's names. She found his address easily, a small craftsman-style home with a carefully maintained garden and a treehouse visible in the backyard. Marcus answered the door, wearing an apron covered in what appeared to be flour, his expression shifting from surprise to concern when he saw her face. "Everything all right?" he asked. "I had an interesting conversation with my board of directors today," Victoria replied. "About you. About Saturday. About whether spending time with custodial staff represents poor judgment on my part." Marcus's expression tightened. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them that you're the most qualified helicopter specialist I've ever encountered, that you saved my company from disaster, and that I'd like to offer you a formal consulting contract if you're still interested." Before Marcus could respond, Lily appeared behind him, her face lighting up when she saw Victoria. "Victoria! Did you come for dinner? Daddy's making pancakes, but they're really lumpy because he's not very good at cooking." "I heard that," Marcus protested mildly. "My pancakes are perfectly acceptable." "They're terrible. But I eat them anyway because it makes him happy." Victoria felt her throat tighten at the casual intimacy of their exchange, the easy affection that filled the small house like warm light. "I don't want to interrupt your dinner," Victoria said. "I just wanted to let you know that the consulting offer is official if you want it. Part-time, flexible schedule, competitive compensation." Marcus studied her face with the same analytical intensity he'd shown while diagnosing the helicopter problem. "What changed your mind?" he asked. "This morning you were worried about media attention and corporate politics. This afternoon, I realize that corporate politics shouldn't determine who I respect or why," Victoria replied. "Your daughter asked me if I was going to get in trouble for being your friend. I decided that if I did, it would be for the right reasons." Lily tugged on Victoria's jacket. "Does this mean you can come to dinner sometimes? Daddy never has friends over, and I think he gets lonely, even though he pretends he doesn't." The innocent observation hit both adults like a revelation. Victoria looked at Marcus and saw her own loneliness reflected in his carefully guarded expression. "I would love to come to dinner sometime," Victoria said softly. "If your father would like that." Marcus hesitated, and Victoria could see him weighing the invitation against protective instincts that had kept him safe for 3 years. "Lily's right about the pancakes," he said finally, stepping back to let Victoria enter. "But we have syrup, which covers a multitude of voter cooking sins." As Victoria followed them into the small kitchen, she felt something settle into place in her chest, a sense of rightness that had nothing to do with business strategy or career advancement. The house smelled like vanilla and flour, and Lily immediately assigned her the task of setting the table while providing detailed commentary on proper pancake flipping technique. Sitting at their small dining table, watching Marcus carefully plate lumpy pancakes while Lily narrated the engineering principles of effective syrup distribution, Victoria realized she'd found something she'd never known she was looking for. Not just professional partnership, but a glimpse of what life might feel like when success was measured by different standards. "These pancakes," Victoria said after her first bite, "are indeed terrible." Lily giggled delightedly. "Told you!" Marcus laughed, a sound Victoria had never heard from him before, warm and unguarded. "I'll work on my technique." "Don't," Victoria said quickly. "Some things are perfect, exactly as they are." The words carried weight beyond pancakes, and all three of them seemed to understand that something important had just been acknowledged. Outside, Seattle's autumn evening settled around the small house like a blanket. And for the first time in years, Victoria Sterling was exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, Marcus Chen's modifications to Coast Guard rescue equipment saved 4 lives during a fishing vessel emergency off the Olympic Peninsula. Sterling Aviation's stock price had reached record highs, driven by military contracts secured through innovative engineering solutions that competitors couldn't match. Victoria kept a photo on her desk from Lily's 8th birthday party, showing a small girl blowing out candles while her father and a woman in a business suit looked on with matching expressions of joy. Visitors to her office often commented on how different she looked in that picture. Relaxed, genuine, human. The transformation hadn't been without costs. Harold Morrison had resigned after the board meeting, taking a position with a competitor where he could maintain traditional hierarchies without interference from executives who valued character over credentials. Some stockholders had questioned Victoria's leadership style, but profits had silenced most criticism. More importantly, Victoria had learned that success built on authentic relationships was more sustainable than success built on fear and isolation. Marcus consulted for Sterling Aviation 3 days a week, his insights revolutionizing their approach to practical engineering challenges. The other 4 days, he remained Lily's father first, a priority that never wavered. And sometimes, when the boardroom felt too corporate and the penthouse felt too empty, Victoria would drive to a small house with a carefully maintained garden, where pancakes were terrible, but love was abundant, where a brilliant child built space stations in sandboxes and reminded adults that magic was real if you believed hard enough. The helicopter that had brought them together sat in Sterling Aviation's museum now, its sleek lines testament to what could be accomplished when expertise was recognized regardless of its source. But the real achievement wasn't in the aircraft's sophisticated engineering. It was in the understanding that sometimes the most important problems couldn't be solved with money or degrees or corporate authority. Sometimes they could only be solved with the willingness to see clearly, to value truth over appearance, and to measure success by the love you gave rather than the power you accumulated. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that understanding came in the form of a 7-year-old girl who asked the right questions and a father who had learned that being necessary to one person was more valuable than being impressive to 1,000. The equation that had brought them together was finally solved. Written not in engineering specifications, but in pancake breakfasts and bedtime stories, in consulting contracts that honored priorities, and in the revolutionary idea that brilliance could be found anywhere if you just bothered to look. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.